welcome everybody, and happy Valentine's Day. What a beautiful way to celebrate love and life, and of course loss, which I know so many of us on the call have experienced. All of those things, and what a great way, what a meaningful way to be able to experience this day, which often gets sort of, it's very hallmark and very maybe not meaningful. And I love that we're able to imbue a ton of meaning into it with our speaker today, Jason Rosenthal. Before we get started on that, just a little bit of like love Torah for you all out there. The line of love, and I think in our Torah, well, there's a lot, but the one I'm thinking of today is Ani Ladodi Vidodi Li, which is I am for my beloved and my beloved is for me. Perhaps that is written on a ketubah or two of yours. And what I love about that is there is this reciprocity, right? That I am for this person and this person is for me. But also it's not a totality, which I think is what we're going to hear a little bit tonight, if it's anything that the book has to offer, which is that there is a little bit of empty space. There's space for each person to grow together when ani ladodi vidodi li, when I am for my beloved and my beloved is for me, that there is that emphasis of the me, right? Of making sure that we are honoring the person that we're with and honoring who they are as an individual, and as a whole person, and how they grow and how they change. So we get to hear a love story about growing and changing and lives diverging and life changing in ways that no one would ever imagine they change, which again, as I said, unfortunately, many of us have experienced such, none of us have experienced exactly the same thing ever. But the idea that we change and grow together, and that life throws at you intense curveballs, or just tragedy, we can just call it as it is. And that is horrible and distressing and tragic, and builds our strength and resiliency in ways we never knew possible. So today, we have Jason Rosenthal, who wrote this wonderful book. My wife said, "You may want to marry me," as a response to this awesome column that she wrote in Modern Love. And Jason Rosenthal is a number one New York Times bestselling author of Dear Boy, which is co-written with his daughter Paris, which is awesome. He is the board chair of the Amy Krouse Rosenthal Foundation, which supports both childhood literacy and research in early detection of ovarian cancer. He is a lawyer, public speaker, and devoted father of 3. He is passionate about helping others find ways to fill their blank spaces as he continues to fill his own. He resides, as we heard, above the L train in Chicago, a city he is proud to call home. And this evening, we're going to hear a presentation from Jason about his book and his life. He is an open book, and we'll hear that for about half of our time together today, and then open it up. I have some questions, and we'll also open it up to questions from all of you. So if you have questions that sort of come up, feel free to put them in the chat, either to me or to Shira, who's on WHC Zoom, and she'll send them over to me, or you can ask them in your own voice when we open it up later for questions. I'm so glad you have joined us. And Jason, I'll throw it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, my pleasure, and thank you for that lovely introduction. Good evening. I would love to talk with you this evening about a bunch of stuff. But first, before I do that, I wanted to say thank you so much for having me in your community. I am familiar with the area. I went to undergrad at American University, and so spent a decent amount of time up your way. And one of the things I certainly regret about this virtual space, even though definitely has its benefits, but one of the things I regret is that I'm unable to be with you in person. And so I'm really grateful that you all chose to spend part of your Valentine's Day with me. I put on my red shirt for you guys. So it's really, really wonderful to be here. And so let's get started. I do want to start the evening out with just acknowledging what is still an ongoing, very, very difficult time of all of our lives. This whole COVID pandemic has affected all of us in some way and caused us to avoid certain activities that we really treasure. We've all experienced loss during this last year. I can't believe I'm saying it's been a year of all of this. And that loss takes many different forms. It takes the form of really just missing out on your normal routines. It takes the form of not being able to see each other and embrace each other and physically touch each other, which we are prone to do as human beings. And so when we can't do that, it's so difficult. And perhaps it's caused some financial difficulty or hardship for you or some members of your family. And many of us, of course, have been affected by the loss of someone close to us in our lives. So I did want to take just a moment to recognize that and to tell you that I have experienced some very significant loss in my life. And this pandemic has caused me to reflect on so much of that. Um, and as much of it helps, I hope, to tell you that there's some really positive signs that we're going to get through this and we're all going to be okay. So um, I couldn't let the evening pass without really acknowledging that. But now I'd like to focus on the purpose that you all chose to be here, and that is to discuss my book, which, as you heard, is called My Wife Said You May Want to Marry Me. And it's really a memoir of my life and my life with my family and my spouse. And it takes three primary parts. The first part of the book is really a story which is appropriate today about love. And it's about family and it's about joy and all those years of us raising our children together. The second part of the book is really pretty difficult. Um, and I could only write it in a way that I knew how, and that was to be honest about what it's like to be with someone you love at the end of their life. And thrown in there as well is some discussion of what it takes, what it's like to speak to someone and to be there for someone who is experiencing grief. And the final part of the book, it's my intent to be a hopeful portion of the book because it really expands on how I was able to find resilience in the face of a devastating loss. And I think that that's an important lesson for people who are also going through something very difficult. So let's talk about those two human beings that are the central focus of some of the writing that I've been doing, certainly of this book, and about the essay that Amy wrote that we'll touch upon in a little bit that many of you probably know. So it was 1989, and I was in law school studying for the Illinois bar exam. And I got a phone call from a gentleman that I affectionately called Uncle John. And as it turns out, Amy also called him Uncle John because John had dated my mom in the early 70s when she was in between her marriages. And John, as it turns out, also happened to be Amy's dad Paul's best childhood friend. So he called me up and he said, you know, there's this wonderful woman moving back from a advertising job in San Francisco, and I think you should call her. You guys, I think, would hit it off. And so I took down the note. I said, okay, John, you know, I'm really busy, but I'll give her a call. And for some reason, when I was going through the process of sitting down to write this book, I found the actual Post-it note from that phone call that John placed to me. You can see I spelled Amy's name wrong and everything. But we did go out on my first and only blind date. And as Amy famously said at the end of that dinner, at that date, she said she knew she wanted to marry me. Me, it took me about a year after that, but I did come around. But so in between that period of time, you know, I was studying for the bar exam and I had this big trip planned after, and I was coming out to the East Coast and doing this big road trip. So Amy and I got to know each other in a very unique way, something that our kids and grandkids probably don't even know what this form of communication is, which is we actually wrote good old fashioned handwritten letters to one another. And it really was a great way to get to know each other, and especially getting to know Amy, who is such an incredible writer. And we quickly became inseparable. You know, you can see from these photos, these early photos, no comment about the color of my hair, please. You know, I know that's drastically changed and gotten a little thinner, as you can see. But anyway, it really does show just the joy and the love that we have for each other each other in a very, very early stage of our relationship. And we began to spend almost every moment together. And we did what every young couple does, right? We started a couple of businesses together. I guess you could call them startups, although that wasn't a word back then. The first one was a T-shirt business called 272 Productions, and we we basically had two departments. Amy was the creative department, and I was everything else, the legal and the marketing and all of that stuff. And we come up with ideas, put them on T-shirts, and sell them. And it was actually really, really a fun business, pretty successful business, and allowed us, like I said, to get to know each other in a unique way. And the other business was a button business. Who knew that I could sew buttons, right? But this was a business where we would scour flea markets everywhere we went. And we would bring home these buttons, buckets of buttons, and sift through them, pick out the best ones. And we made jewelry. We made brooches and bracelets and other things and sold them to family and friends and soon to the wider community as well. And again, just a really wonderful way to spend hours and hours together and get to know each other in a different kind of way. And so there it came about a year later, and I surreptitiously set up a area of my dad's commercial film studio. He had a studio here in Chicago back then where he shot commercials, and I went to the sound stage and I set it up like a scene from Paris. The tablecloth, the pictures of Paris, French music playing, and a bottle of red French wine. And I got down on one knee and I proposed, and I think you can guess that Amy said yes. And so I got another taste, a really detailed taste of what it was like to live with the queen of list makers and a writer. When on our honeymoon, we came up with this list we called Amy and Jason Rosenthal's Marriage, Goals, and Ideas. And it became a thread that I used throughout the book because without having this posted on our fridge or looking at it every day, in fact, I only came about it when I was, again, researching my own life to write this book. It was in those bins that we all have, that we collect. And I thought, wow, this really is so significant because, like I said, without really knowing it, we did model our lives kind of on this list. A few highlights. One was dinner time, a time to be together. Music in the background was great, but TV, no way. Never stop learning, which the rabbi alluded to in her opening, because we did individually and together read, cook, take classes, and of course we traveled quite a bit together too. And that allowed us to grow individually and together. And this was important. And when I've talked to groups all around the country now, this has resonated with people, whether they've been together for decades and decades or just recently engaged or getting married. And that is to get dressed up and go on dates. For us, it was a way to remember who those two people were that fell in love before the beauty, don't get me wrong, but the chaos and the beauty of family life quickly came around. And so that happened to us. We were blessed. We had these three wonderful additions to our family. We had two kids in diapers for 6 years, and so there was a lot of chaos, but there was also a great deal of joy and fun and whimsy and creativity, which you're going to get when you have Amy as the leader of the household. And after Paris was born, our youngest, our daughter, Amy made a pivot. And many of you may know Amy, in fact, as a prolific author. She was a children's book author, and she wrote two beautiful memoirs of her own, but several of these books you see here and others were New York Times bestsellers. A couple appeared in the #1 position on that prestigious list. Technical difficulty, give me a moment. Okay. And when the boys were little, I sat them down and I interviewed them about what they felt about how their mom was doing as this new version of herself, this writer. Let's hear what they said.
I think she's a very good And I think it's pretty interesting that she's wrote almost 5 books. 500. She's an amazing writer.
Well, these two young boys are now in their 20s, and they were both right at the time, because Amy did write somewhere between 5 and 500 books. But Justin nailed it when he said that she was really a terrific writer, and he's correct. So Amy's creativity, and all of us tried to infuse this sort of creativity into our lives because of her, transferred over to other aspects of our life too. It wasn't just in her words, in her books. It was in sort of everything she did. She was a queen of lists, like I said, but also of wordplay. And so when that little girl Paris started to grow up and was going to become a bat mitzvah, we traveled to Israel. We took the entire family to Israel, and plastered across the bus that we traveled in for that period of time was this poster that Amy had made. And I wanted to share with you some of that scene in Israel, because let me show it for you first and talk about it after. So amazing. I feel new. Do you feel new? I understand when they say we're... So we were blessed to be there, and it just shows you how important family was, not just to me and Amy, but to our entire extended family. And it was a really beautiful, beautiful trip. Now, the thing about life is that sometimes this beautiful love story, and others I'm sure that you know, don't always end up the way that you want them to. And so it was just when Paris, that beautiful bat mitzvah girl, was off to college, literally that very, very same weekend, when I got a call from Amy. She was in DC, as a matter of fact, at a book event. And she called me from there and said, I'm not really feeling that well. Something going on with my stomach. I called my family doctor, and she said, you should probably pick me up and take me to the hospital to get it checked out. I said, yeah, that's a good idea. Thought it was appendicitis or something. This type of complaint from Amy was rare. For 26 years of marriage, I can't remember her ever complaining about even a stubbed toe. That's how strong she was. But of course, it was then that our worlds were rocked and turned upside down when we discovered that Amy had a malignant tumor that turned out to be ovarian cancer. And I want to take a moment just to share with this group some of the signs and symptoms that are present for ovarian cancer. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your family physician, and remember this acronym, BEAT. Because many of these issues, you strong women who are on this call, you have sometimes, and we still don't have a test for early detection of ovarian cancer. But like many people experiencing this terrible diagnosis, we did have a glimmer of hope when, in the summer after her surgery and some of her treatment, we had a moment of remission, and we had an epic dance party here at the house that only Amy could pull off in a one-piece lime green jumpsuit. One of the stories I tell in the book, which I'd love to share with you this evening, is the theme throughout much of my book, to many people's surprise, is how amazing we human beings are to one another when we need each other. And I want to share this one quick story, which is that we were in home hospice, and I was Amy's 24-hour caretaker. I was here all the time, didn't even go down to my office or anything. I was posted up at the dining room table, like I am again during the pandemic. And I went out for a short while to get some groceries, literally gone maybe 20, 25 minutes. And I came back to our street here in Chicago, a tree-lined street. It was about dusk. The street lights were on, and it was beautiful. And when I looked down the street at our fence, I was stopped in my tracks, because all along the width of that fence were open, strung up yellow umbrellas, which I'll talk to you about soon, became Amy's legacy symbol. and this beautiful sign. And the amazing thing about this story, and the reason I wanted to share it, and I prefaced it that way, is because we still, to this day, don't know who left that beautiful scene for us. Now, like I said, many of you may know Amy from her writing and from her Modern Love column that appeared in the New York Times on March 3rd of 2017. She wrote an essay that was called "You May Want to Marry My Husband." And it was an incredible, incredible piece. It was so beautifully written. The prose was stunning. It was sad and tragic, but at the same time, like most of Amy's writing, contained humor. Not many people could combine all of those things in one essay. And it went crazy viral. It was read by millions and millions and millions of people all over the world who promptly reached out to me and to our family. And changed my life, really. Of course, changed my life because I knew that Amy was so terminally ill and died 10 days later, but thrust me into a position, into a spotlight that I never imagined, couldn't anticipate, and of course didn't ask for. And so when I saw this tile at a tchotchke store shortly after Amy died, I knew I had to have it because it was really true. It was a new life for me. And chapter 1 was just beginning. It was very quickly after that, not just because my loss was really public, but because this is what happens to those of us struggling with grief and loss. And we begin to grapple with these very significant issues. And I began to learn to embrace grief and know that everyone processes their loss differently. There's no right or wrong way to flow through this process. And I also learned, because so many people reached out to me, and still to this day do, to not shy away from talking about your story of loss. I know people think it's sad and maudlin and depressing, but trust me, it brings one closer to another when we begin to share our own stories of loss. And the other very poignant and significant thing I learned from Amy, but also in having to experience it myself, is to try to appreciate the simple moments that life has to offer, much of which we sort of just walk through in a daze. But we don't know how long we're going to be on this life, so try to do that. And I love this quote I read recently in a book on grief. We need to find a way to talk about both things, the reality of deep, persistent pain, and the reality of living with the pain in a way that is gentle, authentic, and even beautiful. And so I began to really find my voice, my speaking voice and my writing voice. And when the folks at TED came to me and said, "What would you think about giving a TED talk on your journey?" I paused and thought really hard about it because I was a really private guy. But I knew there was one way I wanted to do it, and that was to be really honest about what it was like to go through what I was going through, to be with someone you loved at the end of their life. And some of those details, those graphic details that you just don't hear about or read about in this country because we're not that great about talking about end of life issues. And so I did. I agreed to give a TED talk, and it was, of course, a very big stage. But I immediately learned, based on the overwhelming response that I received after that talk, that so many people have a similar story and are itching to have someone to talk to about it. And I found my writing voice as well, which came first in the form of a Modern Love column of my own that I wrote on Father's Day of the year after Amy's piece appeared, and of course is called the same thing as my book. My wife said, "You may want to marry me," and gave me the platform and had the publisher who approached me to expand it into this book form. And talk about writing, what a gift that I had in being able to write a book with my daughter Paris called Dear Boy, which, Rabbi, I'll have to send one to you now, that became a New York Times #1 bestseller. And of course, like I said, gave me the opportunity to write this book that we're here to talk about this evening. A couple of other things I learned about myself during this difficult period, like I touched upon in the beginning. And I write a lot more about it in the book, so I encourage you to read it. And that is that somehow, in the face of devastating loss, we find a way to be resilient. And one of the things I knew I wanted to do soon after Amy died was to commission a piece of public art in her honor. I just knew that Amy, throughout history, will go down as, I believe, a Chicago icon. And so I navigated the city of Chicago and the Chicago Park District for 2 full years to get permission to erect this beautiful piece of art in Lincoln Park. If you ever come to Chicago, come visit, come sit and reflect, come read a book, come have a picnic here in Grandma's Garden. And this is the whole extended family at the unveiling. And one of the opportunities that I had, because we had some time after Amy's diagnosis, is to really talk deeply about some important issues. One being, how was I going to single parent these unbelievable children? But I've learned how to navigate that a little bit. I'm still learning, trust me. But I've gotten to know them in new and unique ways. And one thing that Paris and I were asked to do this past summer for the graduates who were unable to be together is to participate in a virtual ceremony. Woo! Which this video became a part of. And I've gotten to know these 3 now. Look at them. They're young adults, 28, 26, and 24 years old. And I've learned from them, which has been a very, very beautiful process. A decent amount of what I've heard from people who've read the book is that they appreciate the way I talk about how to approach someone going through the grieving process. And of course, I'll leave it to you to read the book to get into those details. But one thing I say that people are a little bit shocked about is, what's the best way to approach someone who's going through something very, very difficult, like grief or loss of someone that they love? And that is to say something. Don't shy away from saying something. And it could be as simple as saying, you know what, I don't know what to say, but I want you to know that I'm thinking about you and I care and I'm here for you. And the biggest advice I have to people is to just be yourself, be kind, be authentic, and practice your empathy muscles. The other thing that I did immediately, not really knowing how, is I started a foundation in Amy's honor called the Amy Krouse Rosenthal Foundation with a 2-fold mission. We talked about ovarian cancer, and so the mission is really specific to the early detection of ovarian cancer, and we've been blessed to fund some research in that area. And the other part is child literacy, and we've been really fortunate to be able to donate tens of thousands of books to kids in needs. And in this past October, we were supposed to have our 2nd annual fundraiser here in Chicago. But like everyone, we pivoted to the virtual space, and I want to play you just a small section of that video.
Last spring and summer, the organizations Save the Children and No Kid Hungry included some of my mom's books, as well as the book I wrote with her, Dear Girl, in their campaign titled Save with Stories. Here is a short compilation from the project.
Hi guys, my name is Reese, and my friend Jennifer called me and said, hey, would you want to read some stories to some kids? And I was like, yeah, I love to tell stories.
I'm going to read Dear Girl, #1 New York Times bestseller by Amy Krouse Rosenthal and Paris Rosenthal, illustrated by Holly Hatam.
Guess what I'm going to read to you today? I'm going to read Dog Rabbit. This is a story about 2 very different people looking at the same thing and seeing 2 very different things. This story is called Uni the Unicorn by Amy Krouse Rosenthal. I love this book.
No, the rabbit is so hot he's cooling off his ears. That's the sun, and what's that? Fish.
We had some wonderful participants. And so here we are, like many of us experiencing loss, there's this empty space, this blank page, which is a metaphor that I've gotten from Amy's original essay, where she literally left me a blank space at the end of that essay. Uh, Ironically, on Valentine's Day, to find the new love, yes, but also I've used it as a metaphor to move on and to fill that blank page with new experiences and a new appreciation for life. And so I leave you with a couple of thoughts. One is that there will be plenty of darkness in your process of loss, perhaps, but try and try to find that light because it will come. Loss can take you to joy, and loss can take you to beauty. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and come back and visit you.
Just beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Again, as you say, like sometimes people are nervous about what to say in those moments, and like beautiful doesn't even capture it. And so I use the word knowing that it only says so much. I I often say that the favorite part of my job, I was made fun of this actually when I took the job at Washington Hebrew, that the favorite part of my job are funerals. And that often gets a laugh from people, and people think I'm insane. But it's because of what you shared that I feel so lucky in my position to hear these stories of people and to hear people's life stories and to have the conversations like your family had about like, well, actually, we did have this conversation with our loved one and here's exactly what they want, or we didn't have this conversation with our loved one and we're really lost and we have no idea what to do.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that and I think in my office, but usually in my office, people are willing to have these conversations and to share their life story and to share their loss and to share their sadness. And as you said, often out in the world, although weirdly pandemic has helped this and made it easier, but often out in the world, people don't feel comfortable sharing this story. So and you seem so comfortable sharing it. So I'm wondering what advice you have for how to how to share your grief with others and how to have those conversations with family members about end of life and end of life care and what your wishes are. So it's sort of twofold, if that makes sense. Like some advice about how to go about that.
Yeah, I would what I say when I speak publicly to groups, even before the book came out, is to have those conversations early when you're young. Please don't wait. I think I said that in my TED talk as well, and that really means, at any age, and I encourage this for younger folks too, but at any age to begin to ask those deep questions, and they range. You can make your own list. Some I think about are, what do you want? Like practical stuff, like what would you want to do for a service if you had one? Do you want a religious component? Do you want it to be secular? Do you want us to play some music? What would be some of your favorite songs if you want music? Even so far as to say, do you have a short list of some people that you might want to have speak for you or about you, about the family at that service? So those are some really practical things. And then, what do you want to do with your body? That's a really important thing too. And then there's other deeper questions that one may ask. And for me, like I alluded to, it was uh, parenting issues, like if you have children, if you're blessed to have children, what advice do you have for me if I'm left alone here as a single parent? Um, and, that's a short list. There's obviously a lot of people who have to tie up loose ends, of relationships that are extraordinarily difficult. And so that may be something you may want to give more consideration to as you contemplate these very difficult issues.
Um, yeah, it's wild, how simple that question is. What do you want to do with your body? And how loaded it can be and how difficult it can be to actually ask it. But I think I didn't count them. It's like 5 words, right? And it can open up such a huge conversation. I already have some questions in the chat. I have a few of my own though, so I'm going to use my moderator power. But if you have questions, start to think about your questions, send them in the chat, or think about being brave and raising your hand in just a bit. My other question is actually, maybe I should have flipped it, because it's more about the beginning of your book, or the beginning of your life with Amy, which is, we just actually, as a congregation, we just did this class called Partnering in Pandemic, that was like, you're in love, but who knew you were going to spend 24/7 together? And so I'm in this mode of like, what advice you would give, and you have the list, and I love that. Like, what advice would you give to couples, particularly in pandemic, but to keep love and intimacy and excitement alive, as you and Amy did so beautifully?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's three parts to a relationship, you know. There's the two individuals, one and two, and then there's the two of you together, and that's three. And I think it's very, very, very important. And you touched upon this in your introduction, because I write about it in the book too, about giving each other a decent amount of space to grow as human beings individually, because it makes you such a better partner. You know, and for us, that was some simple things like, you know, when I was early in my legal career and I would try a case and I won, you know, Amy would make a big deal out of it and write me a note or do something beautiful and sweet like that, you know. Or if she had a book come out, I would really, you know, get the kids together and rally and make it a big deal because it was, you know. And so really acknowledging those little milestones in one each other's lives. And then um, you know, really making time, like I said, making time for one another. More difficult if you have a family in a pandemic, but I think you probably could do it, you know. Put the kids in front of a movie or something and just have a nice meal together or cook or do something. But it's very important to really make time for one another. Don't ever let that go.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have one question from a participant, which is that if you were consulted, if Amy ever consulted you about what she was thinking about writing and the Modern Love article about publishing it, like, what was that like?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I will say it's the number one question I get all the time. You know, um, I did not know what she was writing. That's the quick answer, but the longer version is, you know, she was sitting across the room from me, and I knew she had this one final project that she wanted to do, and so she was sitting there and tinkering and kind of dozing off due to the obviously terminal illness and the medication that she was also taking, and getting back up and writing. And you know, this was a process that I watched happen, but I didn't know what it was until it was done. And she said, do you want to read it? And I said, of course, sure, yeah, I'd love to read it. And my initial response was, wow, I mean, this is incredible. The prose itself was so beautifully written, and of course it was funny. And then, you know, the cherry on top was that it was about me mostly. And so I gave her my blessing, of course. But you know, this was a woman I was married to for 26 years, and you know, she started her writing career when I was with her, of course. And I had seen a decent amount of rejection, even with a very accomplished writer. You know, you never know what's going to happen. And so I didn't know A, if it would get published, and B, where, but she did. You know, she was sure. And she had her eyes on the Modern Love column, which frankly, before that, I really didn't pay much attention to in the Sunday New York Times, but I obviously do now. Um, and when it was published, it was just absolutely astonishing. Like I mentioned, I think in, you know, a bit in my talk, we never, I never anticipated the type of response that it did get, and boy, it was crazy.
Um, the Modern Love column is like one of my favorite sermon material go-tos. That and This American Life. So I'm a big fan of the column. We have another question asking if you can discuss the yellow umbrellas a little bit more. What did that mean to Amy, and why did that become the symbol of the foundation?
Sure. You know, what I would encourage you all to do is to maybe just Google Amy's name, and many of her films come up. She was a prolific, you know, filmmaker. We called her a tiny filmmaker because she was 5'1" on a good day, and also the films were pretty short. But um, she's got a bunch of them, and they're wonderful. You can actually go to the foundation website, and there's links to all of her work there. And there was a one in particular, one of the early ones was called The Beckoning of Lovely. And this was just a creative project. Amy never did any of this for material gain. It was just to put art out into the universe. And The Beckoning of Lovely was basically, it started off with a small film that said 17 things I made, and then the 17th thing will be for us as a community to make together. And she said, I will be the one entering Millennium Park, which was her favorite spot here in Chicago, carrying a yellow umbrella. And much to our surprise, and certainly to Amy's surprise, many, many hundreds of people showed up for that event. And it became her symbol. And the film, I really encourage you to take whatever it is, 7 to 10 minutes to watch it. It's so beautiful. And that became her symbol, and it's now become her legacy symbol.
Beautiful, beautiful. I am going to open up the floor. Those are the questions that I've gotten so far in the chat. But if you have a question at the moment, Lori Hurwitz, hello.
Yes. Hi. So it just occurred to me. I wondered, did Amy write anything to your children directly before she died?
Not specifically like a detailed letter, if that's what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
We had time, and so she, had these beautiful, long, extensive conversations with all of them, and with key players in her family as well. And we did have this tradition that I've maintained of writing signs on milestones and other occasions, and Amy did have the foresight to write a few of those signs for some significant upcoming events, which was, I was going to say 2, but all 3 of our children were soon graduating college. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
You allude to this in the book, but so, I guess Linda just asked in the chat as like the question that often gets asked to you, which is, what are you doing now? Are you remarried? How did that happen?
Well, I guess I can talk about it. It is Valentine's Day, and I'm not remarried. I'm in a beautiful and meaningful relationship, and I talk a little bit in the book about what that was like for me, because I know a lot of us widowers and widows as well find the process of, even though, here's someone who got the most public permission one could ever imagine, right? It's a really daunting process to face, to even think about, dating. Like, what does that mean? I never expected to do that again after 30 years of not doing it, and so I wanted to share a little bit of the process in the book, and I do. And what else? What am I doing? I have spent, the last 4-ish years transitioning away from my legal career into more writing and thinking and public speaking. I've spoken all over the world, and I don't know, that blank page is really meaningful to me, and still is something that I think about every week, and it's really a gift, because I don't exactly know what the next, professional phase of my life is going to be. Hopefully more writing.
We hope so too. So, we are, you do mention Judaism a little bit, and I'm gonna, to take the rabbi plunge here. You say, you have this quote, I wrote it down because I really loved it, that I think it was either when Amy was sick, or she had come back, and you said, if there was a God, she must have been sleeping on the job this time. And what it brought up for me was the amount I hear and have experienced a really struggling relationship with God in moments of suffering. So I want to know, a little bit about what role God and religion played during this time for you, if it was helpful, if it was hurtful, and how could God and religion be helpful during all of this?
Well, I don't want to convey the wrong message to people who, find faith so meaningful, because I so totally respect that. I know that many people lean on their religious communities during this period of time. And, you're looking at a guy who went to parochial school all the way up until 7th grade, and, So Judaism is and was a big part of my life, not only with Amy, but growing up and then with her and raising our family, etc. But having said that, you ask these insanely deep existential questions about what everything means, in my opinion, when something like this happens in your life. And I just, it just was not a resource for me to go to my, um, religious leaders at that time. I was lucky, I had a cantor who was beautiful and came to our house and sat with us and talked to each one of our children. So there was that component, of course. And we did have our memorial service in a synagogue, but it was reform and they were very amenable to working with what we wanted to convey and what we wanted to do for that occasion. But, religion is a part of my book and I do write about it. And I could read just a small little excerpt if that's okay. So I was talking about going to parochial school and Jewish day school, and I say that there were lots of traditions that we maintained in our family. And one that stuck and became meaningful in so many ways was our Friday night Shabbat dinners. They were a time to enjoy not only each other, but our extended family and our wider community as well. Whatever the details, Shabbat dinners meant slowing down from a hectic week. They meant being together for traditional prayers, including a prayer Amy always recited specifically for the children. Candles were lit, wine was poured, and bread was broken. Simple, quietly reverent, and always, always full of gratitude.
It's beautiful. And I mean, of course, I love that moment in the book, and and also that I know that I asked the question about God and religion with no judgment, with no Jewish guilt. More so that it's just fascinating that this thing that we think is going to provide so much resource, when we actually come down to it, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay, right? Like that everyone, as you say, goes on this path of grief and loss in their own way. And I think you speak about that so well, so correctly and so beautifully. You started off your talk by sort of acknowledging the moment that we're in, and that, God, do I wish we were welcoming you at Washington Hebrew and we could have a wonderful meal together. And what you spoke about in your book was grieving when you and your family were in the center of grief, and people were helping you grieve, or supporting you while you grieved. And now we're in this different world in which so many of us are grieving in lots of different ways, and so many of us are hurting in lots of different ways. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that moment, grieving specifically for people who have died, but also that we're all sort of in this more vulnerable spot, and how do we support one another? And maybe it's a large existential question, right? But how do you support someone when you're also going through similar but different grief as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, being there for your neighbor. And what I've learned over this last year, like, again, I can't believe I'm saying a year, but you see it over and over again, how people just go out of their way to flex those empathy muscles that I was talking about before, and to be present for people and to do unique things in the face of a environment where we can't even see each other or be with each other. Whether that's rolling down the street with signs on your car, or offering to get groceries for an elderly neighbor, or all of these other things we've all been witnessing. Also in a face of a very, very difficult year too, regardless of what your political view is. It's been a really tough year. Seeing a lot of just negativity, really, I would call it. In again, regardless of what side of the political fence you're on, it's been tough. And so, but there's some silver linings, and I'm sure you've seen this. You touched upon it, but my stepfather passed away on November 9th, and was married to my mom for over 40 years. And we had a Zoom funeral, and it was devastating to think about that my mom was going to be alone in her house in front of a computer, when her husband passed away. But I was able to be there with her. I walked her through the technical stuff, so that was good. And what really ended up happening was a beautiful scene, and that is that people literally from all over the world tuned into that service and said, beautiful things and heard stories about Todd that they otherwise perhaps wouldn't have heard. And so that was really, really beautiful.
I'm so sorry to hear about your stepfather. And yeah, that's what we're experiencing all the time. It's one of the reasons why funerals are so wonderful, but also how weirdly this virtual world has been able to exponentially for people to be able to see that so much more.
Yeah.
Right? God, do I wish you were with your mom? I mean, you were with your mom, but God, do I wish your community was with your mom in that moment? And there is something beautiful about being able to connect from all over the world that can help boost those memories and those stories. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any last questions for Jason here? And I just want to, yes, Marcia Pinson, hello.
The lucky part, I think, one of the many lucky parts, is you have a wife who expressed her soul in many of her books. I just bought Plant a Kiss for my 20-month-old grandson for Valentine's Day. But the article she wrote for Modern Love was very much between the two of you. And I wonder, I don't know if her parents were still living when she died, and you had 3 children. And I wonder if they felt about your moving on as generously as she did. Because I know there are, the ripple effects of losing a loved one are so profound. And we all grieve, even in a family, in different ways.
Yeah.
And having to deal with in-laws who have lost a child would be really tough. So that's one big question. And the other one would be watching someone you love so profoundly know, and that they are not going to have the future you had hoped for must be devastating. But suffering is also not a pleasure or even an honor to witness. So at the end of her life, you were ready, you let her go with the knowledge that you would go on as she hoped.
Thanks, Marcia.
Sure.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing about my unique set of circumstances, and thank you for that question, by the way. I think everyone in the family would say this, but I certainly would, and that is that, I really feel like Amy's family is my family. I don't draw that distinction. I'm so fortunate in that regard. Her siblings are still a very big part of my life. My mother and father-in-law were alive when Amy died. My father-in-law has since passed. And, I have a deep connection with my mother-in-law. But, I think your question might be based on some personal experience. If not, it's very prescient, because you're right. It's a challenging and difficult way forward. And I still struggle with how to infuse my new relationship with everybody in my family. But I'll tell you this, I think at the end of the day, those people in your orbit who are most important to you really just want one primary thing. And that is that you be happy, and I think that through that emotion, you will get that kind of support, even though it's difficult and it doesn't always feel easy to go through it.
Thank you. And I'm just so grateful that you have written this book, and that you are willing to share and talk about all of this messy stuff that is what life is, and that is what loss is, right? Really messy, hard, and feels and can, you speak about this as well in the book, that it hurts every time, and know that we are just so grateful as a community that we are that you are willing to share this with us. I will be remiss if I don't remember to say that this has been put on by the Jewish Book Council, and we are so grateful for that. And I also just want to share, and this is me closing out, that when someone dies in our faith, we say the words of Mourner's Kaddish, which, if you ever looked at the words of Mourner's Kaddish, they say nothing about death. They say how awesome God is and how wonderful God is, and God is, awesome and omnipresent, and all of these great adjectives for God. And the way I teach this to our students at Washington Hebrew is that it's a fake it till you make it prayer. At the moments when we are so low and so dark and so down, we put these words in our lips as a way to say that at some point we're gonna come back to life, and we're gonna see the light, and we're gonna see life and God, and maybe God, but life and ourselves in a new way. And Jason, what the gift you have given us is the ability to see that, as you say, that there is darkness, but light will come, and that there is beauty and strength in loss. And what a gift that is to give to the world, and to give to us today, especially on Valentine's Day, that a really great love story is really, really messy, and really gives so much of us to be able to be strong and resilient through it. And so thank you for providing that message for us this evening. It is a blessing for us in our community. So really, really thank you. And thank you all for joining us.